should be recording now.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Indexer Office Hours 34. I'm Gary. I'll be filling Jim's shoes for the meantime. He's on a little break. So I'll do the best I can to pick up where he left off. So first on the usual agenda is Node Watch. We'll start with 𝗨. So I see that, I think it was about 6 days ago, they had a new release. From what I could gather from the change logs, some highlights were performance improvements to tracing via some new callbacks, which are used in the internal tracer. Some fixes for edge case out of memory problems and RPC connectivity hanging. I don't know if anyone's got any comments on this. Usually 𝗨 is quite a stable upgrade in my experience. Anyone tried it?
Well, it sucks that we don't have Jeff around. He's the only one I know who's running 𝗨 nodes right now.
Oh, really? Yeah. No, I've got some, but I've upgraded it, but I've not seen any problems. But you know, it's better to have more eyes on it. But like I said, normally 𝗨 is pretty solid anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
What do you use them for? What do you use 𝗨 nodes for?
I use it for a number of things. You know, Chainlink. There's lots of other projects that are using 𝗨 nodes, but as far as the archival goes, I think it's just one of our fallbacks for the graph at the moment. I don't think I've got anything else pointing to it currently.
Yeah, 𝗨 obviously doesn't have trace support, so it's not as universally useful, but it does offer better indexing performance than OpenEthereum and Aragon in some workloads.
Plus, in the past,
That's interesting.
There was so many problems at one point with OpenEthereum that it became a kind of, you know, foundational point in my Ethereum stack for things that didn't require tracing, which is quite a lot really outside of the graph itself. So
well, the only reason why it doesn't support, I mean, 𝗨 does support tracing, but they have their own kind of
debug.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see that to be usable, but you know, I suppose we've got Aragon that's getting better along the way, but you know, there's nothing wrong with having a variety of clients to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you know, it's worth kind of just having on the horizon that most of the indexing workload is going to transition over time to depend on the firehose approach as opposed to pulling data out of nodes via RPC. So yeah, RPC compatibility and trace support via RPC just won't be important anymore. And a great kind of consequence of depending on the firehose output is that the quality of data and the granularity of data that comes out of the firehose is much better. And yeah, that will allow quite a number of kind of advances in the way the graph node executes triggers and just generally bring a kind of better quality of data and indexing experience to the ecosystem. But yeah, so long term, you know, the trace RPC API doesn't really matter.
Okay, so you think that further down the line, 𝗨 will be, you know, more feasible, ignoring the size of the, you know, disk requirements?
Yeah, the way that the firehose works, I believe that the patches that Streaming Fast have developed to instrument the EVM are kind of 𝗨 first, so that's probably going to be the first class instrumented node for Ethereum. And you know, the way that instrumentation works is like as the node is actually executing transactions, it kind of just spits out the instrumentation data, right? The traces, the state diffs, all that kind of stuff. And then that data is kind of extracted and stored in files externally to the node itself. So we won't actually need to run archival trace nodes or anything like that. We can just run regular, you know, reasonably small in terms of storage requirements full nodes, because the only requirement really is that the node executes every transaction and therefore produces this instrumented output. But the nodes, can actually be just regular full nodes.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. I remember you mentioning about this, I think back when Stream first presented, but I didn't realize it was quite that impactful regarding our choice of nodes. Yeah, that sounds really good for us. So we'll move on to 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗳𝗂𝗧 next. Since last week, I saw that there's been 2 releases. The latest one just seems to have some RPC fixes, and the prior one has some performance improvements in general and to RPC. Maybe Penn and Goldie have played with this already. No? Anyone else using the latest 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗂𝗧?
Yep, I've upgraded all of my nodes and no problems.
Okay, yeah, I just remember in the last indexer office hours, someone said, I think it was Penn, said that he's scared to upgrade because it usually breaks something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't really, we are not really big fans of 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗂𝗧 nodes right now. Because somehow there are like determinism issues, and we just fully rely on the Open Ethereum at the moment.
Yeah, I'm currently syncing, like I have 2 or 3 servers that I'm currently syncing from scratch, all the major subgraphs. Currently, I think I've done, I have almost all of them synced. Only W, ETH, and Omen are still syncing very slow for some reason. But that's also based on the server specs, obviously. But I'm going to check all the POIs or like compare them on chain this week and maybe report back next week if you can note it down, Gary. To see what I can find. I'm still running. I think it's a 2 or 3 weeks old 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗂𝗧 version, but it's not that old, so it should be fairly accurate. But yeah, I mean, we managed to fuck up our database by switching from from Open Ethereum to 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗏 to unstuck it at some point, and we need to rewind back, I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and then resync everything once again. Hopefully that fixes things. But we can clearly see the divergence based on literally the moment that we switched in between Open Ethereum and 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗏𝗧, because it's noted down in the epoch. The epoch they started diverging versus the date me and Sebastian talked about switching between those two. So yeah.
Payne, let's get some time booked. I'm currently syncing 18 subgraphs on 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗏, and of those, 12 are matching the quorum of on-chain POIs. And of the 6 that are not, like at least half of them are known to just be generally non-deterministic. So, obviously 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗏, like ETH clients are hard and determinism issues are hard, but I'm not seeing like rampant state, divergence. So yeah, we should kind of cross-reference and figure out if we can. Yeah, I should also say I follow a very kind of particular workflow when upgrading 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗏, whereby I shut down all of the index nodes that depend on the underlying 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗧𝗏 nodes. I then shut down the RPC daemons, then shut down the nodes themselves, then basically follow the reverse with the upgraded version. So nodes up first, I wait for those nodes to, show healthy syncing behavior and pick up peers, then the RPC daemons, and then the index nodes.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, we'll definitely talk this week. Probably even, I'm not sure if I can do it today. Maybe I can. But yeah, let's have a chat. So for in our case, basically what broke was we had the EIP 721 subgraph that was stuck. If you remember with the out of gas errors, Chris. And we were already on the latest graph node, which was 24.1, if I remember correctly. So all we had to do was to plug in the first it was so there's two environment variables to get out of this particular case, depending on which node you're running. We were running Open Ethereum, so for Open Ethereum, I think you would have VM execution error set for these environment variables, and the other ones for Geth and 𝗨𝗀𝗳𝗂𝗧, I think it was something with literally out of gas. I think it was for the variable, and we added the variable, and then we also switched at the same time from Open Ethereum to 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗳, and then back to Open Ethereum. So I'm not entirely sure what broke those subgraphs, but I think Goldberg checked last week and literally nothing was matching, but we closed our allocations anyway because we didn't have a choice.
I think 721 has determinism issues.
It didn't have up until some point.
Yeah, but I think that the determinism issues that cropped up have been cross-client.
Huh. Okay.
That
But
should
it was
be
not
verified.
only it was not only that it was not only 721, but basically almost everything, I think.
Yeah, no, I was talking specifically of that subgraph because due to that subgraph having errors, out of gas errors, we had to roll these environment variables in and switch to 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗳 in order to unstack it. So we first tried with Open Ethereum, it didn't work, and then we switched to 𝗨𝗨𝗀, and it went over that, and then we switched back to Open Ethereum after it got over that error. And yeah, immediately, like, we didn't, you couldn't check the POIs immediately. So like after a week or so, when we were about to close the allocations, we saw literally nothing matching on chain out of, like, I don't know how many subgraphs you check, Goldberg, but I think it was a lot.
Like 10?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think, Chris, let's definitely jump on a call this week and figure it out. I have multiple databases. I can spin up more. We can test it out as long as you want, with any kind of client that you want. But it would be great to gather more data about this.
We've also, so in past office hours, I think it's been a few weeks, but I mentioned a tool that we were building. We now have a V1 of that tool at Edge and Node, which I think maybe Chris and you and Payne could start testing out and maybe share that with the rest of the community. But basically what that tool does is it provides a server where you as indexers can run a command from Graphman to share your POI tables to that server. And then the server will identify the divergent blocks and then share back to you what those were. And then you can use another command to share your entity changes. And then the server will do diffs and identify where the entity differences were between those two indexers, or maybe many indexers. So this is basically automating much of the investigation process that I was doing in the past for arbitration and for identifying POI differences and root causes. So this is something we can run on the Edge and Node cloud infrastructure and start to roll out to the rest of the community.
Cool, that sounds great, Ford. Payne and I will touch base, and yeah, it makes sense to use that tool to dissect some of this stuff further.
And then related to that, has anyone been using the community tool, the POIifier, for like chatting between each other about POIs before they're put on chain? Just curious, like, who's tried that out?
I haven't had time. Yeah, they released it literally before me departing from my country. So yeah, I'll get to it probably this week. Since now I have time and I'm back home. I'm very curious on how that works. I haven't had much time to even read much about it, but I know it compares the a reference POI basically to other indexers.
Yeah, I think that could be interesting to help indexers identify divergences earlier. Although right now I think like a more pressing and salient issue is just root causing the determinism issues. And for that, I think the tool that Aaron built for us over at EduNode is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. So I think indexers should not be like the behavior right now is to hide those errors or determinism issues and figure out ways to find out your POIs and submit them right on chain. So like everything looks clean and dandy, but like if you look or ask different indexers, they all have had problems with this. So yeah, I do believe your tool is more important right now. Like this should be the focus on finding the root cause and not just hiding and like figuring out how to get to the consensus POI, so to say.
Just on 𝗨𝗂𝗲𝗂, you know, it's awesome to see the community come out with this kind of tooling. Personally, I would like to see that kind of functionality supported by the network in such a way that doesn't require a centralized reporting and aggregation server. And you know, there are a few approaches that have been surfaced around this, namely having indexes expose both their you know, kind of real-time indexer hashed POIs as well as reference POIs via the graph node indexing status endpoint. I think, you know, this is a really well, I'm, you know, maybe not entirely qualified to say this, but I think that's a relatively small technical lift and would allow indexes to kind of independently come to consensus about what other indexes have, you know, as POI and kind of detect and group divergences without having to rely on any kind of centralized reporting server. So that would be a great start. But more broadly, something that I you know, is certainly a longer term pursuit for the protocol, but I think there's this interesting design space of allowing indexes to participate in a P2P network. You know, how abstract, I don't know, that could be like Waku based or libp2p or whatever, but essentially allow indexes to gossip with one another and communicate with one another in a decentralized way without any kind of centralized dependencies. And, you know, having that network in place just unlocks a really large design space for, you know, finding consensus and making, you know, kind of indexer local decisions based on wider network data. Yeah, just in a really kind of scalable and decentralized way.
Okay, that went off on a bit of a productive tangent. So where were we? That was on Aragon. That's where we came from. Okay, so last but not least, Open Ethereum. No new releases there. Obviously, we know it's coming towards end of life. And there was an announcement today in their Discord that the boot nodes that are run by Gnosis themselves are being turned off at the end of October. So people should probably bear this in mind going forward. It might present peering issues for your client down the line. And since this is a sign of things to come as far as the end of life goes, it might be a good time for people to start strongly considering Aragon if they haven't already. It's also not great news for those of us that are still relying on it somewhat.
If anyone has trouble with Aragon or questions, or please post in the Aragon channel or in the Indexes channel, and yeah, one of us will help you.
Yep. Thanks a lot. So next, indexer tooling. That's one of our regular spots, but I was going through the repos for each of the tools mentioned in previous indexer office hours, and I didn't see any changes to discuss this week. So we move on to the repo one. Graph node. Some of the merges I saw this week was that there's new HTTP endpoint for querying subgraph names by their QM hash. This might be of interest to those of you who have some tools that use, or you desired something like this for your tools, or those of you guys who build dashboards. Prometheus metrics to monitor the notification queue. That might be of interest to some of you Grafana nerds. And there was some other activity I noticed on there, and some of you with eagle eyes might have also noticed, but I've been asked not to talk about that yet. So I don't know if anyone else has any comments on any changes on there. Anything to talk about, Ford?
Not much to report right now. If anyone's in the core devs call, I mentioned some testing things that I was working on, a local test environment, which is going to be mostly for core devs, but it's pretty interesting. It's running a completely encased local graph network on a local chain, dev chain that can be run on a laptop. So that's just something I'm working on right now. And then the indexer agent, we have some things coming up with manual allocation management, which is something I've been talking about for a while, but finally I'm going to get to start working on maybe this or next week.
Cool. So next on the agenda, forum highlights. Looking through the forum over the past week, a couple of threads caught my eyes. One was the thread require that more recent POIs are submitted in order to collect indexer awards. The latest discussion in that thread seems to be revolving around potentially requiring fresh POIs to open an allocation, either instead of or alongside the requirement for closing it. Has anyone any thoughts on that? I don't know who's taken time to look at that thread recently. I think the comments were from Brandon, if he wants to speak on that.
So what exactly?
Can folks?
Oh, never mind. Go ahead.
Can folks hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, my Apple completely changed my security settings, and I lost push to talk. Yeah. So if the update is on the recent POI freshness work, Ariel's done some prototyping on that, evaluating the gas costs. It doesn't look too onerous, and it actually gets even better as we tighten up the window of time. So like the max we can do on chain and actually check that they correspond to recent blocks is about an hour to about 256 blocks worth. But we could tighten that up in theory to like whatever we think is a reasonable window for indexers to get their transaction mined, and obviously that can be dynamic based on times of high congestion. But also you can always choose to close your allocation a little bit later, a little bit earlier. So there's also some flexibility there. But yeah, that would be a point of feedback. I guess we'd love to hear from indexers on like, what do you think is an achievable window? Keeping in mind that the smaller we can make that window, like the better consistently quality of service we're going to be able to provide to subgraph developers. And, this has specifically been a point of friction with subgraphs that have been trying to migrate to the network, where indexers were basically getting rewarded for being a day old, with their or even multiple days stale in terms of their data freshness.
Yeah, as far as the topic goes, I think it would actually be a good move. Indexers obviously acting rationally, they go with how the system works currently, which is yeah, you can have a bit of a lag behind, and you don't get penalized for that. But if we want to really press people to index and serve, then we should be pushing them towards, incentivize, only passing out the incentives once they do have data freshness, I guess. That's my take on it anyway. I don't know if...
+1.
Yep. One other benefit, just kind of a side benefit, this actually helps indexers, is that you sort of get built-in replay protection from this change. Like right now, we sort of implicitly assume the block hash you're submitting a POI for based on the timing of the closing of the allocation. But by making that explicit, if hypothetically, I don't think this has probably happened to anyone, but let's say there was a chain reorg, you already put a transaction out there for a POI as of a block that maybe got reorged, then you could in theory be on the hook for slashing if everyone thinks that you submitted an incorrect POI. When in reality, you'd submitted a POI for a block that got reorged. And so, with this update, that transaction would get rejected because the contracts would basically be able to verify that the block hash that you were submitting for is no longer in the chain history.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I actually wondered if you'd be more exposed to something like that because of you submitting something closer to chain head, maybe closer to a reorg point.
Yeah, exactly. That's where some of the new gas costs are coming in, is actually making sure that's a safe operation for indexers, and so doing that checking of the cross-checking of the block hash that the POI is submitted for.
Cool.
I'm also curious, like, wouldn't that be making cross-checking on-chain POIs a bit more hard or not as predictable? Because are you still gonna use? I don't think you're gonna still use the start of the epoch anywhere, right? The start of the epoch.
It's true that on-chain POIs will no longer consistently be for the same block hash. That's already not that big of a problem, because like even today, to an outside observer, if you see like 5 POIs submitted for the same block hash, because they're committed POIs, because like they're hashed in with the indexer's public key, that actually doesn't really give anything to an external observer. Like really, you have to be an indexer that's produced the POI yourself to be able to cross-check against on-chain POIs. I don't know offhand, maybe Ford how easy it is to do this for historical POIs, like arbitrary historical POIs in the agent today. We might need to actually update how it does its cross-checking logic. I'm certain we would. But the indexer can produce POIs for historical blocks. So even if they didn't themselves submit an on-chain POI, they could see, an on-chain POI for an indexer as of some other block and still cross-check that in real time.
Okay, I did have one other topic from the forum I wanted to go back towards, but just being mindful of time, I'm going to put that on hold for now because P2P, 𝗨𝗂𝗂 from P2P has requested a little time just to talk about their experiences with the dshackle tool. If anyone isn't aware of what that is, it's a Ethereum node balancer. So maybe Jazz, you want to talk a little about your experiences, what's good, what's bad?
Yeah, okay. Thanks for this opportunity. We tried dshackle with 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗧. So currently dshackle is easy to set up. We have a sort of external load balancer, and after this load balancer we have 2 dshackle nodes, and we have some get nodes for transactions only, and 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗧 nodes for archive and tracing data. This setup worked good, and we tried to remove some nodes. We tried to make some nodes out of sync, and dshackle catch all these issues and didn't put traffic on these nodes. So I guess dshackle is a good yeah.
Oh, interesting. I wasn't sure if they'd had 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗧 support yet. I haven't looked at them in a while. I remember they didn't have updates for a while. They were even suffering after the London fork for a period.
Yeah, they currently support 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗧. So you need to provide methods, Ethereum methods that you want to execute on each node. So you create sort of list for available methods on nodes, and when dshackle solves this method, he will put this request on node which supports this method. So
Okay.
it doesn't matter dshackle or open Ethereum or 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗧 or open Ethereum.
There is actually an open issue in dshackle to add Aragon gRPC API support and basically skip out the RPC daemon in the middle, and that should significantly increase performance.
Yeah.
Question from me. So at least, one of the kind of controversial points of dshackle is, even though it's like, supposed to be pretty high performance software, it is written in a JVM language, and so it's probably quite heavy. Can you share any information about like what kind of request throughput you're putting through dshackle and what its memory usage looks like?
We have two virtual machines with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and we have about we tested it. We performed stress tests using 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗪, and we get about 1,000 requests per second for not heavy requests. And also we tried to sync subgraphs, and we was able to sync all of I guess 10 or 11 subgraphs in parallel on two 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗀 nodes and two 𝗨𝘀𝗃𝗀 nodes.
Hey, pardon my ignorance, but can you explain like I'm 5 what the 𝗨𝗃𝗃 does?
𝗨𝗃𝗃 is load balancer for Ethereum nodes. So in 𝗨𝗃𝗃 checks a chain head, checks the status of node. So if it didn't add chain head, it won't put traffic on it. Also, it broadcasts all requests to every node. I guess, and also you can provide sort of methods that you want to execute on specific nodes. Also, it provides a good fallback. For example, you can use 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗀 or Infura as a fallback.
All right, interesting. So how does it?
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
You can it support retries. So when you failed request on one node, it will try this request on another node and then use a fallback. But if you add fallback, it will also send health checks to this fallback, so you have a bit of traffic here. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Maybe I'm a little ignorant of whether it really matters in our context, but I was wondering what kind of load balance methods it supports, like just failover, round robin, or
round robin. But when you execute the request, it will execute it on each of your Ethereum nodes.
I think that's optional.
Compare the responses and send you the correct one.
That's a configurable piece. So yeah, I think that's called race mode, where it will just distribute the request to all nodes, and whichever one responds first, it will. But yeah, you can also do round robin with failover.
Have you been using this a while, Chris?
I've played with it, but it's not currently in my production stack.
Okay. Yeah, it seems quite a glowing review from you, Jazz. Have you got anything bad to say about it?
I guess no. If you want to try 𝗨𝗃𝗃 by yourself and have any questions, you can ask me in Indexer Software channel.
Thank you.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Okay. Does anyone else any more questions on that topic?
Maybe Chris provides some information about his testing.
Yeah, not a huge amount to add beyond what you've said. I've tested it distributing requests across Aragon nodes, up to 5 of them, alongside Open Ethereum nodes. So in that sense, kind of all of the nodes, all of the nodes have a homogeneous capability set, even if they're different clients. So I haven't really tested like workload splitting. I also haven't tested failover, but generally, the testing that I've done has been positive, and I think that there's a lot to be said, not just for the utility of being able to load balance your ETH or your RPC workloads, but the fact that it is an application-specific load balancer, and it actually does introspection of the requests and responses, allows it to be really smart, like you've said, Jazz. So if it will like monitor the chain heads of nodes, and if one falls behind, it will take it out of traffic distribution, So yeah, there, you know, it's a good abstraction layer, not just for load balancing, but also for just like general error correction.
Yeah, and also current developer thinks about adding support for Firehorse to 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗪. So because they both use gRPC, which can improve the performance. Okay, that's all.
Okay, cool. Thanks for your time explaining that. Anyone else wants to give that a go?
Yeah, I have a question, quick question. What about the cache layer? I see that they can have a Redis cache. What could it be used for? Is it improving some performance or no? Did you test it or no?
No, we didn't test the cache yet. I guess we will perform some testing later.
But do you know what data will it cache? Block data, transactions, maybe some traces, or what can it cache?
I'm not sure, but I think block data. The responses, yeah, they provide. So in graph situation, this will be the blocks.
All right.
Thanks.
If we're done on that topic, then roll back to the forum highlights, because I know Oliver was talking a little about this in the last Indexer office hours, and it was coming up to the end of the meeting. The proposal to calculate Indexer delegation capacity as a curve. It's been a couple of weeks since there's any activity on this thread. Does anyone have any suggestions on how we could move forward on this topic? Since we seem to
maybe I can set the stage a little bit. So Brandon already talked about the vulnerability of a Sybil attack of the proposal that we have in the forum. In addition to that, I've also provided some deeper analysis on the effectiveness, even without a Sybil attack, of that sort of change. It's going fairly deep. The key takeaway is that the optics would look great if you are a fan of decentralization, in that you would lower cap multipliers for larger indexers and expand them for smaller indexers. But the projected real effectiveness is fairly low. A couple of key takeaways are that small indexers right now are not suffering from hitting their respective caps, to receive more delegations. In fact, they are fairly low compared to large indexers. There are 3 times less delegations they receive on their respective self-stake, and an increase in the delegation cap multiplier, therefore, does not seem to be an effective way to change things. The other piece also that I elaborated on is just the aggregated network capacity that we have when you take indexer self-stake multiplied by the 16x cap that we have today. You come to the conclusion that there is excess of delegation capacity in the network past the total token supply by 3.8 billion in total. So that becomes something that is worth considering, to address if you want to have effective mechanisms in place to really promote decentralization. I think it boils down to that this is becoming a much more complex proposal than everyone initially thought. And given that it touches certainly the protocol, the question becomes, is it worth continuing the discussion for this specific proposal?
Yeah, it seems like once you peel back one layer with this topic, another one rears its head and makes you kind of rethink what exactly the issue and the solution is.
One piece of color I'd also like to add is I think there are some lower hanging fruit ways of addressing indexer stake decentralization. So I know in the core devs call already it's been mentioned the better like indexer quality metrics, exposing those in the Explorer. So we're like sorting by something other than metrics that are correlated with stake size. At the EduNode offsite recently, we were sort of discussing sort of optimal sequencing of a lot of the different proposals, kind of trying to manage our own time when it comes to smart contract development work. And we sort of came to the conclusion that like just getting to L2 scaling is sort of like one of the best things we can do for the protocol as a whole. It just pushes the boundaries in so many areas. One of those areas is the cost of delegating to an indexer. Right now, the gas cost of delegating to an indexer on chain is so high that you really have a strong incentive to like sort of pick the biggest and the best indexer, because like you don't the ROI of actually splitting that across a portfolio is quite expensive to do so. So the gas costs sort of favor winner take all effects at the indexer layer. The other thing that we'd be able to explore as part of the L2 scaling, currently it's something that we would like to propose to be in scope, is enabling automated redelegation. This is something that to do it in the current protocol that's on L1 probably would have been a really difficult upgrade path, given that it's kind of a deeper change to allocation management. But it's something that we can do, and we have a design that we'll be writing a proposal for the L2 architecture. And so also giving delegators the confidence to like move their delegation freely between indexers, I think will also empower delegators to not just kind of go with the safe bet and pick like the quote unquote blue chip or like, perceived safe choice indexers. And then one other possibility here that's kind of outside the gas cost dimension of things is just extra protocol integrations that sort of take advantage of like the DeFi composability of the graph. So there's a project, tenderize.me, which is trying to do this for staking protocols, where they basically, it's almost like a urn vault for staking protocols like LivePeer or the Graph, where, whereas before it would have been maybe too expensive to, manage a portfolio yourself, you can kind of pool delegation with, other folks participating in these pools, and then you participate in governance to decide how that staking or delegation is going to be split, across a number of targets. And they might do something similar for curation in the future. Obviously, with those things, there's always a risk of, you don't want one index fund to become too big and powerful, because that can be another type of centralization risk. But at least in the current climate, I actually think it would be on net positive for indexer stake and delegation decentralization.
And adding on to that, we also have one more proposal in the forum right now that is really non-protocol specific, but goes back to the Explorer, and that is the Solana Beach sort of way to show indexers in the Explorer, where we have at the top a decentralization collapse of large indexers, and at the bottom we've also introduced actually an idea of a reputation threshold, where we're saying that indexers need to at a minimum show that they are active and trusted indexers at a minimum level, including ENS names, that they are actively allocating, and for Chris's latest proposal also are actively querying. And that could be something in parallel to the L2 proposal that Brandon was talking about. Could be a good tag team approach there.
So I was just thinking, layer 2 support addresses one side of that as far as the costs on delegators or indexers making allocations goes. But with a 28-day force still in place, delegations could still be quite static, because obviously delegators don't want to see the potential of losing 28 days of earning on their stake. But with L2 in place, I presume we could also lower that to something that still gives a reasonable max allocation length, bearing in mind that the cost would be much lower for an allocation.
That's right. Yeah, basically making the costs like the main reason right now for a 28-day allocation is to give indexers sort of a release valve during times of high gas prices and high congestion. If they want to sort of slow their frequency of paying that operational gas cost, that could be reduced in an L2 world, which also has knock-on effects for thawing periods.
Have you had any put any numbers together with an idea of what we could be looking at there?
Oh no, I think we're still a ways from putting out numbers. I'd expect it to be, I mean, a rough guess would be at least 10x, but I mean, we need to start the gas model for L2 is different because you're still paying storage costs on the L1 and but then the computation costs are dramatically reduced. So it's not like a clean mapping of like, oh, everything is just going to be 10x cheaper. We need to kind of evaluate our specific usage of the L2.
Yeah, I understand that. I just wondered if you had any insight maybe to manage expectations going forward, not get people too excited.
Yeah, not yet, but definitely we'll be doing some more. Ariel's already started working on, hacking on Arbitrum a little bit. It's kind of one of the deployment targets we're strongly considering. And so we should have some more information to share there soon and maybe some of the upcoming proposals.
Yeah, I think, bringing up this point about L2, it's like just one area where it's relatively uncontroversial to like improve decentralization. Like I think changing the tokenomics of it like is always a little controversial because usually it's kind of zero sum. But if we can just make it cheaper to run an indexer, then that's like, no one's going to complain about that. And it definitely like that seems to be, the real root of the problem is it's just hard for one person or a small group of people without a lot of capital to get started. But, L2 or, moving to Aragon, I think is a good step. And then, what can we optimize? Eventually you'll run out of like low hanging fruit, but we can always just push in that direction and be sure that like, whatever progress you make, it'll go in pretty easily.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, and not just on the like sort of delegator cost side of things, but, also anything we can do in terms of tooling to make it, more effective for a small indexer to kind of join as a single person and be productive, I think is also going to really help with indexer decentralization. I know a lot of the bigger, indexing outfits or folks that are, smaller teams, they have more resources to put together custom scripts and custom tools. And a lot of those have been shared, which is fantastic. But even then, like, we're not at the point yet where I think being a good indexer, even if you want to, is like a plug and play type activity. And I think that would also open up, a lot more participation.
Just to, put weight on the counterpoint, as much as I do think there is a lot of low-hanging fruit and like universally regarded good ideas like an L2 migration, I do think that there are some aspects of the game theory and economics that essentially mean that the network is just, at a basic economic level trending or encouraging centralization or an increase in stake centralization. And, certainly it makes sense to tackle low-hanging fruit first, but like, I do think it's, it's an issue that everybody should be aware of and everybody should feel passionate about because, it to me, something like this kind of feels like, a boulder that is rolling down a hill. Like basic economic gradients really tend to accelerate behavior and shifts in dynamics towards one direction or another. And, as much as there is low-hanging fruit for us to tackle, there are, some more serious economic problems that we need to solve for, decentralization to have a healthy future.
I suppose it's further exacerbated a little that we're currently in what should be the bootstrapping phase for indexers, and if we're trending towards centralization of, the holdings of stake, then it's not, it's the least ideal time for this to be occurring.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to be like a doomsayer, but I think it's important that we can recognize that and know that there are some hard changes that need to be made.
Okay. Don't know if anyone else has any more 2 cents to throw in there. Does anyone have? I've seen Hop typing in office hours chat for a while, but I'm not sure if they're writing in.
Yeah, I will just to wrap that up. As far as the forum discussion is concerned on the Explorer changes, I will take that back and socialize that more deeply with core devs team to just send a strong signal from the community.
Cool, thank you, Oliver. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to talk about in the next 7 minutes? Hope has asked the question. I see, so close allocation many does not improve gas fee wise.
It should do. Like theoretically, at the very least, there should be like roughly a 21k gas savings per closure that's batched. So that the savings might not be massive, but there are definitely some to be had.
This is what you worked on the agent a while ago, is it, Chris?
Yeah, what is merged in is the close and allocate stuff, because that is really like highest impact in terms of, the way that indexes practically allocate capital. I think batching together closures and potentially opens, although I don't know if the contract methods exist for that right now, would add additional gas efficiency, particularly if there was a high rate of churn in the subgraphs that an indexer chooses to allocate to. But yeah, in theory, at least, there certainly should be gas cost savings by batching that way.
How do those compare, though, just to moving to L2, like in terms of cost savings? And then, how much harder is it to move to L2 than it is to, like, optimize these contracts so that you can do batching?
Massively harder. I mean, I'm not the right person to answer this, but it's effectively a whole new deployment of the protocol and like bridging mechanisms, and also at least close allocation many already exists in the protocol contract, so it's really just a matter of implementing the call in indexer agent, and getting the kind of logic around that right.
Seems like a pretty big win then.
Yeah, it seems like these are more than worth still having an eye on in the meantime.
Is this some of what you had in mind when you were discussing manual allocation management board?
No, this is like pretty separate. Manual allocation management is more of an interface change, and that would allow indexers to use the indexer CLI to do lower level changes. Right now they use this abstraction of rules. But yeah, there's a bunch of smaller little gas efficiency improvements that can be made. Chris has an open PR for claim many, which can improve some of the efficiency of claiming. And then there's the stuff that we've just mentioned, close many. And I believe there's already an allocate many function on the contract that can be leveraged. I don't think that is like the biggest, a huge improvement in efficiency, because during regular usage, an indexer is not often, like, I think the close and allocate change that was already made is one of the lower hanging fruit. But yeah, along with those two, there's some other efficiency improvements that are on the list of things to do. And that brings up, if anyone wants to like start contributing to Indexer Agent, I'm always open to like coaching and helping people get up to speed on that, so we can have more contributors there.
One question I do have about like close and allocate, it's just like, if I intentionally like close an allocation because, well, I want to leave it open for a shorter amount of time, like I'm going to end up with 2 transactions, right? And then like that one close and allocate transaction only is issued by the indexer when it's like, oh, it's getting close to the end of the allocation like maximum period, so I'm going to do this. You can answer that later if you want. I don't want to derail the discussion, but I was just wondering that.
Yeah, right now that's how it works. So if you were to set a rule that says I no longer want to index this specific deployment, or like say decision basis never on a deployment, then the agent would simply close that allocation. And then if you wanted to then allocate to it again, it would open another transaction to allocate towards it. Whereas if you, like right now, the indexer agent will automatically roll over allocations when they get to their allocation period end, and it uses close and allocate. So it uses one single transaction to do that. With the manual allocation management interface update, there will be more low-level control there. So you can, at least my plan is to allow you to mark an allocation as wanting to roll over at a certain point, so it doesn't have to wait till the end of an allocation, along with a bunch of other more low-level controls, like how long you want an allocation to be open, if you want an allocation to open a new one, depending on the stats of the previous allocation, stuff like that.
Just on the gas efficiency piece, I think probably the lowest hanging fruit right now is batching together voucher claims and query fee rebate claims. And yeah, I've got at least one of those nearly ready for merging. And the reason is that just, yeah, both voucher claims and query fee rebate claims are naturally very batchable. Like they tend to become eligible at roughly the same time. I think close many and open many is a little bit more tricky because you effectively need to be able to define like batched execution. And so maybe Ford, I don't know how much, it sounds like, this manual allocation interface is quite sophisticated, but if you could almost start a new allocation, set of like batch changes and then say, okay, I want to allocate to this, and change my allocation amount on this and unallocate from this, and then you can kind of execute the batch. That would allow us to kind of maximize the use of on-chain methods. And just to take that idea a little bit further, if we have a similar pattern on the staking contract that was recently introduced to the GNS contract, which is effectively inclusion of a multi-call support. So if multi-call support was introduced on the staking contract, then that batch could actually be completely custom. So we could have one transaction that opens and closes an arbitrary set of allocations, all in one single batch.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. One thing that definitely is in the design space related to what you said is like queuing of actions, where the agent might have actions that it's maybe not sure about. Maybe the POI is cross-checked and it's not sure if it's the valid POI, or there's a 0x POI. The agent will, with manual allocation management, the agent will pend those actions and then give you a list of those actions in the indexer CLI, and then you can approve them and have them be acted upon. So I think it's a really good idea to loop in some batching within that scheme.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Chris, could you possibly write up a short brief for a discussion next week, because we're out of time and I know some of us need to get to our next meetings.
Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot. All right, thanks everyone for joining, and hope to catch you all next week. See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
See ya.